There are no buildings. We have a lot of buildings, and we're going to see some of them. The building up there is our academics building. It's on North George Street. This is our finance building. We have a number of buildings in the Charlestown, West Virginia area. And I just found out the audio engineer who's keeping us straight here, making sure you can hear what we talk about and you can see what we are presenting. He's also from Charlestown, and he actually corrected me on something. Some of the buildings are technically in Ranson, the city of Ranson, and not in the city of Charlestown. So he just corrected me on that. And actually, let's see. That was the academics building, number 11. 12 was the finance building, and they're technically right across the street. They're in the city of Ranson. And this building here, number 14, it used to be a warehouse. It now is a full-fledged building. It's the IT building. Technology is the biggest enabler of what we do. And actually, on top of the IT building, we do have an observatory. And this is the fun part we enjoy. You're talking about your nocturnal life for our program director in space studies. He enjoys looking at the stars. And we are both the only, as far as we know, the only online university with an observatory. We were started in 1991 by a Marine Corps officer, James P. Etter, and it started in his garage, and now we have about 90,000 plus students, and we are in all 50 states and in many other countries. We're not focused on the international markets. They just are incidental, and so I think we have approximately about 5% international students. Majority are in the United States. We were started as American Military University, and around 2002, there's a lot of civilian students who were confused about what an American Military University means. They thought maybe you had to kind of shave your heads and do all kinds of things that military officers do and so on. There are all kinds of questions, so they started American Public University. So we have two brands. One is American Military University and American Public University. But once you're in the classroom, they're the same. So that's what we started back in 2002. We have over almost 100 programs. In the STEM, we have about 15 plus STEM programs: electrical engineering, cybersecurity, information system security, then IT management, space studies, environmental, and a number of other things. We have real-world faculty, astronauts, astronomers. We have authors, researchers, and I understand there's an author right here in the audience too. She just stopped by, introduced herself right before this. Well, she doesn't work for us, but just saying. So academia has a lot of good real-world professionals. In the business area, we do have presidents of companies. We have CISOs teaching for us, and so on. Let's see. We have small class sizes. We try to maximize at 25, but our average class size is about 16. We have both 8-week and 16-week course offerings, and they're very highly engaging. We have simulations and various labs in our courses. And by the way, going back to the observatory, you cannot look into an eyepiece. We do have an eyepiece that sits in a nice cushioned suitcase. We have a camera sitting in it, and you can see that in our classrooms. Remember, we're online, so we have people around the world. So we can see the images, and we can peer into the telescope right from within the classroom itself. Let's see. We have 6 schools, and I'm just going to move on. Our number one differentiator is cost. When the Marine Corps officer, James Etter, started this, he started with the military professional in mind. So he set it so those who are on GI Bill did not have to pay any out-of-pocket money. That's what his goal was, and we maintained that goal. We have a number of partners who are using our courses. Okay, this comes on to the topic we're talking about. We're talking about the Internet of Things, and the number one issue with the Internet of Things. Actually, before I say something, the audio engineer made a comment, and I think it's a good comment to make, and I think we all recognize it. There is nothing such as true cybersecurity. Nothing in life is secure. The moment you stepped out of your house and crossed the road, you were in the world of risk. right? So, but you had to cross the road. You had to be responsible. So when we talk about cybersecurity, we're really talking about being responsible. But the assumption is people are already in your systems, and if you think that's not the case, actually, since we talk about the IoT world, and I'll try my best not to mention country names and so on, so we don't want to kind of make it anything about a geopolitical kind of an issue. But there is a certain country which has tens of thousands, almost over 70,000 videos in people's houses using their own videos, the people's video surveillance cameras. Okay, they have video clips of what goes on in houses. So if there's one lesson you learned today, get your laptop out of the bedroom, and actually, and second thing is put a little post-it note on your camera. And actually, I have some. You can't see it on mine, but I do have a little nice thingy. I'm sure some of the vendors will offer that too. You can stick that on, so when you have a video conference, you can actually turn it on, and you can block it out. So definitely block out your camera, and just be smart. Okay, so now we're talking about smartphones. You can see Samsung is number one. It's about 8.5 to 10 points higher than Apple. But you can see they're the two strongest brands. But the three Chinese brands, the Huawei, the Oppo, and the Vivo, together they comprise 25% of the market. You should keep that in mind. So China is making a big pitch, and the way they are increasing the market share is by offering very good prices and incentives, especially to Thailand, Indonesia, and so on. Now, this may surprise you. If you ask the average person, about what's the largest operating system, they would say it's Apple's iOS, right? That's what you always hear about. But you may be surprised to know Android has 84% of the market share, while iOS has only 14.8%. And it's even less than in the first quarter of 17, it's 13%. But the interesting factor is, together, they constitute about 99% of the market. So if you want to focus on cybersecurity, if you're focusing on these two operating systems, you're doing the majority and so on. And one simple approach, I'm not saying how you should administer it, but if you eliminate the others and focus on these two, I think we'll do it'll be much easier for those who are administering security. Here's the threat landscape, and what's happened between 2015 and 2016. Malware continues to be the number one issue, number one threat in both 2015 and 2016. And we'll talk more about some of the details. Some of the malware may just be things they put on it may be just spyware that's on your systems that's collecting information. It could be something in the financial world where they plan an intercept and so on. And the second one that's considering number two is web-based attacks, where they're taking advantages of your clients, any servers, any smartphone weaknesses and so on. And we hear about all these things all the time. And I won't go through each one of them because we have a ton of things to go through. I have about 100 slides. I'm not going to go through all 100. What I mean is I'll be going through some slides faster than the others. See, I'm an academic, so I can on some of the slides I can take 20, 30 minutes easily. So we'll move on some of them. But one interesting factor is insider threat used to be number 7. It's moved down to number 9. Okay. And this means it was increasing in 2015, but it was staying flat in terms of numbers. Okay, and the last one says it really went down because you can see it moved the rank went down from 7 to 9. And that's interesting, and that's a good principle for us to remember. Anything that gets focused on will improve, right? That's the general principle of management. Anything you focus on will improve. So if you want to improve cybersecurity in some areas, just the fact that we focus on it, and there was so much focus, I don't want to give credit to Snowden, but as once his issue started in 2013, there's been so much insider threat focus that I think we are making a difference now. So that's a general principle that we can learn from this. Okay, coming down to smartphones. I think the problem with smartphones is, using the name smartphones, is that we are, is the name itself, smartphone. So by using a name like smartphone, we assume it's something we use to call people and talk to people. But the smartphone of today is a computing device. It's a connected computing device, and we forget that it is a computer, right? It's not just something that we used to use as a phone, like the good old flip phones that we used to have in the good old days. It's a massive computing device. So there's a lot of data leakage in this world. And data leakage could be in many forms. A company could be collecting data about you on their app, and somebody else gets that at some point in time. The company may store it in the servers, and they can use it. And actually, we'll talk about data leakage later on when we get to the Nest thermostat and so on. Then data disclosures. There are many companies that collect data and sell it to other people, so data gets moved around. When we decommission our phones, this happens very commonly. You go buy a new phone, and normally they'll offer you a price for your old phone. True? Right? And what do a lot of people do? So they just turn their phones over. You know, your phone has all your contact information. For some people who do online banking and buying at Amazon and so on, it has all your data on it. You know, and we just turn it back in. So when we, in the laptop world, in the computing world, I know on the business side, they will always take your hard drives out and do something with it, right? They'll never release your laptops with the hard drive in it. Then you all know a lot about phishing and so on. That's still very common. It's still fairly up there. And spyware is where they implant, in some ways, some kind of, and you can use many ways to do that. You could use a phishing attack actually and do it. And what you do is you click on a link and it downloads some kind of an app onto your smartphone. And that can either sit dormant and wait, or it could be collecting information. So every time you type in a 16-digit number, it recognizes that as a credit card number, and it can send it up to a central server. So it can do a lot of those things. And then you have a lot of network spoofing, where somebody can send information from a different address, and you kind of buy into it, and so you click on it, and then you can you have something on your system that doesn't belong. And actually, this is something very common in this world, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, where they can actually have apps that are listening into your conversation. And I can get each one of these can be major topics in and of themselves. And the one to worry about here is the financial malware, especially in the banking world and so on. If you're doing a lot of online banking and so on. And maybe one general principle is, don't use your browser on your phone to do banking with. If you're doing banking, use the bank's app. Okay? Don't use your browser and go in. Use the bank's app. Using the browser can have other issues. And of course, you have denial of service kind of things. Okay, so at the least, we'll just go through a few things you should do. This shouldn't be something we talk about in this day and age, but at the least you need a password. Okay, now I carry two phones. I have a business phone and I have a personal phone. On the business side, normally they've set the passwords and it's something forced on you. But when they took surveys of a lot of security-related people, cybersecurity-related people, they found that over 60% did not have passwords on their personal phones. Okay, and if I should ask for a show of hands, you'll be surprised how many hands go up if they're honest. Okay, but we're not going to ask for that. Definitely a password at the least. And by the way, a good place to steal phones are at airports, right? Conferences, right? We're so trusting, and then sometimes we also leave them in the airliner in the front pockets, and then we forget, and somebody has it, and so on. So a lot of areas. So at least a password will deter them. Then smart authentication, using either biometrics, whether it's retinal scans, thumbprints, or fingerprints, and at least two-factor authentication, just to be safe. Now, Bluetooth is something we should all talk about. On our smartphones, we always have Bluetooth on, right? For a lot of people, it's a great convenience. When I'm using when I go home and I want to play some music, it connects to my speakers automatically, and it's great, and I can play music. When I'm in my car, it connects to my car system, and so I can talk to just talk to people using the Bluetooth in my car. It's fantastic. So Bluetooth is not the problem, but the problem is we keep it on all the time. For example, in this conference, I don't need it. I'm not connected to anything, right? But Bluetooth has about 10 meters or 30 feet. So if somebody has a Bluetooth device, and if there is, the manufacturer has a little exploit in my Bluetooth pairing system, they can easily get they can get in. In fact, there are terms used for this. There's Bluejacking, and that's the simplest of the three. Bluejacking is where they can actually establish a Bluetooth connection and send information to you, like a free ad or something like that. Then you have blue snarfing, which is a little more dangerous, where actually they can come and collect information. So if you're sending information, they can nab that information, so they can collect information off your phone. And the third thing is blue bugging, and this is more dangerous, where they can actually get into your system and change the security systems, change the settings on your system, because now they have access to your system as opposed to just the information, and they can change the security settings, they can put things in and so on. This should be something we need to turn off. The principle is just turn things off when you don't need them. And by a place where this happens a lot is at airports. We are sitting in close proximity, hundreds of us, within a 30-foot range. So if somebody really wants to get something, that's the place to do it. Wi-Fi. What's the first question we ask when we go to a hotel? Do you have Wi-Fi? Is it free? Right? And by the point is not that Wi-Fi is bad, but Wi-Fi can be dangerous. And by the let's say you're staying. I'm not advertising. I don't own stock in Hilton. I'm just using a name as an example. If I stay at the Hilton, and normally Hilton might have a Hilton guest. In one particular Hilton property, they might have a name such as Hilton Guest as a network name, and they have a second router that's called Hilton Guest 2. Now I can put in another one called Hilton Guest 3, and the average, traveler would not know. The average guest would have no idea that that's a rogue system. In fact, there are a lot of even on the DNC attack from last year. One of the ways they did that was by setting up rogue servers. So that's one of the ways to get information, setting up rogue servers. So definitely be cautious, and especially when you go into public places, to be wise. Nearfield Communications. Nearfield Communications is it's a real great facility. If I want to now Bluetooth just has about 1 megahertz kind of exchange rates. If I want to get much faster rates without having to get into Bluetooth and all those kind of things, with a lot of devices, you can just put them close to each other. They can exchange information. If there's large videos, that's one way to do it. It's a good convenience. If you want to work with certain Google wallets and so on, that's another way. It's really convenient, but if it's on all the time, somebody else can, you're sitting next to somebody and they have a device that can skim things off your smartphone. That can be dangerous. So turn off near-field communication for sure. Okay, apps. I have friends in the security world who brag about how many apps they have. And by the apps are not the problem. The problem is there are a lot of rogue apps. So we need to do due diligence before downloading an app. Make sure the app is valid. Go read about it. Go look at some, research it before you download it. Then the third thing is operating systems behind. There are operating systems. It's a leapfrog issue. As you go along with time, the bad guys come up with a hack, and then the manufacturers of operating systems will create a fix for it, and so they have patches for it and so on. So they have new versions. But but it's a pain loading down a new version. Takes time, So they always have, is it now or later? And guess what? The most popular option is later, right? So many phones are behind, and that can be dangerous. Antivirus software. On everybody's laptop, I'm sure you have antivirus software. But on your smartphones, we don't do it. But smartphones are even more vulnerable and have even more confidential data because it's your personal data. Most vendors will give you about 4 to 5, the ability to download their antivirus on 3 to 5 devices, one of which could be your smartphone. So definitely install that in your smartphone. And another big factor is settings and permissions. Here's one good example. In my car has a GPS system. So I don't use my phone's location awareness in my car. But why do I turn on my location awareness if I don't need it? Okay? Why should people know where I am? Why should applications know where I am? Now marketing folks love it because they can send you geo-targeted ads. So that's really neat. But on this side, we don't need to turn things off that we don't need. Don't give people more information than they really need. And of all the dangers, this is probably the biggest one, but a lot of people don't do it. But there are a lot of novices who like unlock their phones, and the term is jailbreaking in the iOS world and rooting in the Android world. And what we do now is we remove all the security permissions that are set up by the vendor, and we can do things with it. It's a neat thing. Now we can go from one network to the next, right? So that's a neat thing. But in the process, we remove some other security settings. So unless we know what we're doing, we need to stay out of that. So if you remember the stats that we had for smartphones, we had it was about 350 million smartphones in the first quarter, which comes out to about 1.5 billion in a year, sales-wise. The scale changes in the IoT world, and we'll talk about that. It's talked about. Some people look at the IoT as an evolution. We started with the world of documents with Tim Berners-Lee. It was just exchanging documents. Then it became the world of commerce. Then we had all the B2B days and so on. Then we had all kinds of applications developed. And then we had all the social media kind of things, the Internet of People. And so now it's the Internet of Things, where they're connecting sensors. And this is another way to look at it. It started as a human-to-human connectivity in the way back when, with the SMS protocols and so on. Then they set up the World Wide Web domain naming system, so you can exchange content. And then we had more services. And then the Web 2.0 world, we got into social media, as we talked about. Now we're focusing on the machine-to-machine world, or M2M world, right? And that's what we call the Internet of Things. But what's buried in this M2M world is also the world of cyber-physical. It's not just machine-to-machine, but it's people-to-machine as well. So it's a cyber-physical world as well. But the big factor over here is scale. Back in 2010, you see we were just about 300 million devices to be concerned about, and not all of them were connected. A lot of them were separate. And then it became 3 million in about 2014. But now you can see in 2016 it became over 30 billion devices. So the number of devices is exploding, and so that is the biggest concern for us. Okay, and in the internet world, the IoT world, the main thing is there's a lot of sensors. There's a lot of sensors in everything, and they expect about over 200 billion sensors by 2020, of which 30 billion will be connected. So these are smart sensors. They can connect and talk to one another. And just to put things in perspective, 200 billion is about almost 30 times the world population, which is about 7.5 billion. Okay, so you have about 30 sensors per person on an average. Okay. Now, just to look at in the world of PCs, this is the projections here. The actuals about 2013, and they were extrapolated beyond that. So you can see the Internet of Things, all the sensors is where there's such a big influx, if you will. So you can see smartphones are staying, they're increasing but staying about the same. Excuse me. But the IoT, the sensors are increasing. And so the number one issue we want, if we have to carry one thing away from here today, is the word scale. Our biggest enemy for cybersecurity is the word scale, and we'll talk about that. That also talks about growth. Now here are some different kinds of sensors. You have position sensors, you have motion sensors, you can find out how close people are, and so on. And then you have temperature sensors, humidity and moisture. You have all kinds of sensors. If in your air conditioning system, you probably have humidity moisture sensors. We have, for example, in your houses, you might have a breaking glass sensor, which will be an acoustic kind of a sensor. We do have carbon monoxide sensors and so on. So you have all kinds of sensors. And but this is only a small, this is not all of them. There's plenty more than this. But the few things that enabled the IoT world is one is a reduction in the price of sensors. Okay, in the good old days, sensors used to cost thousands of dollars. Now they're coming down to pennies. You can get temperature sensor for 50 cents. So one is the lowering of prices of sensors, and then also of computing devices. And this is the famous Nest, the Nest thermostat and their smoke detector and the video cam that they install. Now, this is a neat device. Now, Honeywell has their own system and so on. Nest was maybe one of the first ones to kind of make this popular. It's kind of nice. It offers, among many other things, offers some nice features. For example, based on my patterns, if it knows I sleep in on Sundays, so I don't turn it up and I like to kind of sleep a little cool and then turn it up. So it knows it can adjust to my normal patterns. That's one. And two is because it's connected to the net, anytime I'm going away from the house, it can track me on. Remember, I'm location aware. One another good reason, they would need it. So I'm going away from the house. So it knows that Dan's gone away. He's about 3 miles away from the house. It can turn the temperature down. So you don't need to waste energy on cooling things down in the hot season. So it can really it can help you with the energy bills. And then as you're coming back and it knows I'm going away maybe 30 miles away, and it knows now I'm coming back to my house in the evening. It knows to turn it back up, so by the time I get back home, it's a little warmer again. So I'm more comfortable again. So it's a nice feature, but here's the danger of all these devices. If it's on the net, anything can be hacked, right? And maybe that's another principle to keep in mind. If you're connected, it can be hacked. And the point is not you should not be connected, because that'll be a sad world. We're not able to connect to one another. But to be always aware that there's a big danger in that world. So if somebody hacks in and they see that Dan's, every day from 8 to 5 o'clock, Dan's temperature goes, they don't worry about cooling it down anymore, so they're saving on electricity. So they look into my data. They can infer when I'm out of the house and when I'm in the house. They can get my patterns. In the good old days, excuse me. In the good old days, when they had to do when they had to scope out your house, they want to steal from you, they want to scope out your house, somebody had to physically get the car or stand somewhere close by in the vicinity and keep an eye, when you leave and when you stay there. Scoping was a physical activity. It is one-to-one. Now they can have systems that just track this, and you have analytics. Guess what? We're not the only one with analytics capabilities, so are the bad guys. So now they can know which houses, who's in what house, and so on. And they can even have a routing system to tell you if you want to hit 5 houses, how to best optimize it. You call that in the good old days in graph theory, that was called the traveling salesman's problem. They can use that to actually tap into houses. So in the IoT world, this is a simple way of looking at it. You have the home, the world of, that's in our homes. where things are automated, whether your meter is, your thermostats are, and so on. And you might have entertainment devices, and a lot of people have Amazon Echo and so on. And I'll make a point before we move on. And then at the building levels, you have buildings and campuses and so on that are also automated. So buildings now can smell, they can know when things are getting hotter and so on. So buildings have human properties, if you will. And then you have the industrial net, which is much more robust, and you have SCADA protocols and so on in that area. Okay, and we made a comment about this a little earlier. So in the IoT world, a lot of the work is machine to machine, but you also have a cyber physical. So you have the physical world. So for example, go back to the Amazon Echo. So somebody talks into an Amazon Echo, and then it starts interacting with the whole world and does whatever it needs to do. It can turn your lights down. It can turn your ovens on. It can start your coffee percolating and so on. So it can do a number of different things, a lot of conveniences. But we also know about the dangers. I think just a couple of months ago, there was an 8-year-old young girl that ordered a whole lot of stuff, toys, a lot of stuff, children's stuff. And the way she did it was she saw her mom ordering using her Amazon Echo, and so that's all she did. She just talked to Echo, and guess what? She ordered a lot of systems, and it showed up. This is the cyber physical concept focused on automobiles. So the three elements there are: one is you need something to control some parts. And then you're connecting between devices and computational devices. And then you need the actual computational devices. So there are three elements in cyber physical systems. Okay, so this is the neat part. Here's where the conveniences are. Now we have smart buildings and smart energy and smart living and so on. We talked about Amazon Echo. It's a lot of great conveniences, right? And you have smart cities also. That's there too. So you have a lot of neat things, and then we're getting into the autonomous driven vehicles. You have the Google's coming out with their device, with their car and so on, and testing it out. And actually, here's another big one in this world, in smart transportation. Actually, there are big barges that can carry over 10,000 containers with not a single person on board. It's loaded by computers using all this, using this fancy systems, and it's unloaded automatically. Everything is tagged automatically. There's no physical person on the ship. Okay, this is looking at the same thing from a little different perspective. That's for the transportation world. This is for the shopping and consumer world. This is the industrial setting and so on. Different ways of looking at it. So this is the M2M world, and this can be a whole hour by itself because there's so many things in here. We won't get into all of them, but you can see in all the different in different areas, from buildings to energy. We talked about retail systems. We talked about this in general. There's much more detail, once you get into this. So you can get in transportation. Some of them deal with the vehicles themselves. Some are non-vehicular and so on. And some of them are other related systems, the overhead systems. So there's tons of stuff. So if you really get into this world, there's a lot to explore. So the opportunities are endless. Here are some general architectures. And actually I'll get into the next one and talk more about this. This is a simpler network, using Bluetooth. And Bluetooth does form a network among different things. And then we have the ZigBees to connect things in your home and so on, which is kind of fairly common. You go to Best Buy and so on, you'll find some kind of ZigBee device for sure, and these are larger systems. So here are some general scenarios. We talked about autonomous driving cars. Now this is interesting. This is for marine, for the world of maritime commerce. Every ship or vessel that's over 300 tons will have something called an AI's device installed on it, so it can be tracked, and so where things are. But the protocols have not improved over the past 30 years, so they're very let's say, they've not kept pace with all the hackers. So if somebody hacks into the system, here are some of the things they can do. They can fake a number of ships at a certain location near a port, and so they can create a denial of service attack, if you will, on that port. And what happens then is, and we say big deal, just know, and then just clear it out. But if they see a denial of service, instead of going to the port in Norfolk, they may go to another port in Charleston, right? And that means there are trucks. There's a whole secondary market over there. All the trucks have gone up to Norfolk to pick up the goods out in New York, and so they no longer have any services. So they're suspended for 3 days till they clear everything out. So they can really hurt commerce. So if people want to hurt commerce, this is one area they would do it. And you can see there are smart gear for our soldiers. These are smart buildings. And these are smart grids where, a lot of people have solar systems in their houses and they're buying back the energy and selling the energy on your behalf too. So you can see there's going to be a lot of energy at the personal level too in people's houses. So you become a part of the whole smart grid system. Let me move on from here. Now, in terms of security, now this is for those who are academics and so on. In the good old days, we had the 7-layer OSI protocol. So that's for the open systems interconnect model. So we had these standard protocols, very common. If you did any book on communications, open any textbook on communications, you would see this. There's another way to look at it. They introduced some of the protocols that we used to, HTTP and FTPs and so on. And this is the TCP, which is at the transport levels. And then at the network level, you send packets, and they're the internet packets, the IP protocols. So the term TCP/IP, this adds the addressing to the packet itself. Okay. Similar to this, smartphones have a layered protocol. Similar to that, this is a layered protocol for Samsung Knox protocol for the smartphones. It definitely has a lot of good notoriety in the marketplace. So it's also just like the 7-layer protocol. We have similar protocols, but organized slightly differently. But in the M2M architecture, there are 3 main domains. One is the device domain, the actual device itself that people are connected to, in the sense they're looking at devices connected to people in that sense. And then the second is the network, where you're connecting all the things that take care of communications. And the third domain is the applications that run on them. So there are 3 domains that we need to protect. This is the same concept. We're now using some different diagrams. You have the device domain, the network domain, the application domains. And this is just much more detailed. If you're in an architecture class in a university, you'll be getting to these things. And this is another layered approach to looking at the security architecture. So I'll move on from them. Okay, and this is the way some different platforms have implemented these. So this is Cisco's. So you can see this is where all the sensors are, and these are and they have the concept of an edge. The edge of the internet where the systems are. So you have edge computing devices, and then you have something at the core. And so this is a common term in the IoT world. Computing on the edge is different from computing at the core and the center. And here you do a lot of the analytics and so on. Here you're controlling the sensors. You may collect and aggregate some data that the sensors generate and so on. This is Intel's IoT platform, and similar, you can see the device side and the gateways and so on, and you can see the application side where they have analytics and so on. So, this is a Microsoft solution. Microsoft being a more corporate kind of a client, you can see they introduce things like configuration management, so they look at it much more as a corporate client. Okay, so there are a lot of good opportunities. For those who want to do business in this world, they expect this to become a $2 trillion market by 2020. So there's a lot of room, a lot of money in this world. Here are some companies that have already made a big name for themselves, Intel being at the top. And you can see you recognize most of the companies. And Gartner is the company that does a lot of research in this world. That's why they made a lot of a name for themselves. This is in terms of analytics. In terms of numbers, you can see even in terms of numbers, Intel is still at the top. So they've done well in terms of sales. So they're making a lot of money on this net. In fact, in a lot of big companies, they have a vice president for the IoT future. Big companies generally tend to do that. So you can see here are some, just many companies that are in this world, from watches to fitness to healthcare. So you'll recognize the Fitbit, and there's plenty more. There's tons of stuff here, and you can see the home automation systems and so on. So there are a number of companies here in this world. And these are some of the companies that just focused on making your home smarter. So you'll find ZigBee here as well. So you'll find things from device controllers, things about safety, and so on. And Nest should be somewhere up here too. I'm not looking for anything specifically. So there's tons of things in this world itself. It's a big money for those who are investors. There are many investors in the adaptive reality and virtual reality systems. So if you're planning to start something in that world, there's a ton of folks who are willing to invest money in you. If you're just in the IoT world, there's a lot more investors, and here's a ton of them. Okay, this again is just a variety of different companies in the IoT space. But just like every other world, you have some of the good folks, and then you have folks that are out there to do the wrong things. So this is from BI Intelligence. They project that by 2020, in 2015, it was about 5 million, and it's expected to become 120. That should be billion, I believe, right? Yeah, a billion. It went from 5 billion to about 120 billion. So that's about 24-factor increase in about 5 years. So if cybersecurity is a problem now, it's expected to be much worse. And here's one of the reasons. Even if you go back here, most of the nodes were insecure nodes. There's only a small fraction that is secured. So that's one of the reasons for that. Because a lot of people, here's one of the principles. Innovation will always outpace caution. Innovators want to make sure they bring new things to market, and they can silence the voice of those people that are shouting caution. Here are some of the downsides. You have regulatory issues. When you talk about drones and so on, they're just catching up with the laws for how you can manage drones and so on. There's competition, but the number one factor is cybersecurity. Okay. Let's see. Here are some of the Gartner predictions. They said over 50% of iOS device manufacturers will not be able to address threats. Okay, they are good at innovating, but they're not good at making sure there's enough security. And then they said that over 25% of enterprise attacks will involve IoT. And here are some of these challenges that we find in the IoT world. One is people are always in, if you go into an average conference, go to an airport, people are always on the cell phone. They always are, always want to be in the digital world. What has increased? Remember, in the smartphone world, we were about 1.5 billion. We're going up to 30 billion devices that are connected, and 200 billion that they may not be connected. So the number of ways to get into the system has increased exponentially. Then some of the devices have vulnerabilities. Now here's one of the big challenges. If you only had 3 devices to install, I can put controls on installing those 3 devices. When there are 30 billion devices, how do you introduce a new device? If one device was bad for some reason and you're putting in a new device, I can go stick in a device that is totally corrupted, or to use some of even the simple social engineering in the good old days, right? These USB thumb drives. This number of thumb drives that already have some malware on them, and people just leave it and give it to you for free, and then you install it, and that's why thumb drives are not too popular in security conferences. And the same way here, I can easily put some malware on my device, and now I'm connecting to your system, and you're trusting it. Another big factor is there's not enough standards in this world. And actually, the final thing is there's not enough commitment to security. There's a lot more fun in developing new systems. Now, here are some of the threats. Devices and different things can actually malfunction. There could be an outage. There can be attacks, and I'll go through some of these. And even from natural disasters, there could be issues and so on. So in malfunctions, you could have a malfunction at the device level. You could have it at a systems level and so on. So some of these malfunctions may be because of poor design. Some of them may be just because that's life. And so what happens when you have so many devices that are going bad? How can it provide an opportunity for the bad folks? If there's an outage, in fact, just imagine a world if somebody takes out the satellite systems, and I don't mean take them out physically, just blocks the GPS side of satellites. Imagine if we have no GPS, what will happen to our cities? Right? Most of us some of us in this audience have forgotten how to use a map. Some of the younger people, if you say that's a map, they'll say, what's a map? Right? You remember when we used to go on vacations, we had a call, I forget who we called, and we'll get maps and so on and plan the whole thing out. I think AAA or somebody we used to call and get maps and plan it out. The young people say, man, you guys are crazy. Right? So we would be totally non-functional, even if GPS was taken out. So if this maritime commerce is based on GPS, what happens to them? Right? They would not be able to navigate and so on. So implications can be pretty large if there's an outage of certain things. And actually, here's something. If one day I forgot my phone, so I was out for about a couple of hours. You felt like you were naked, like something was totally wrong. Right? You just were, I didn't necessarily use the phone all the time, but just the fact that knowing that I didn't have it really threw me off. Now, there could be physical attacks. Some could be, theft, vandalism. We talked about some of these things. But if the bad guys can actually sabotage, if it's a business, they can actually sabotage your business, and they can change the web page and put data on them that you shouldn't have, and so on. And of course, in terrorism, in fact, the future world of terrorism is going to be less and less on the physical destruction of property. A lot of them are focused on the cyber world. Cyber terrorism is much bigger, and it's going to get even bigger. In fact, as many of you know, some countries have armies dedicated to this world. And the good news is, on our side, so who handle, we have the armed forces for going into war, right? You have the Navy, the Air Force, and so on, and the Army and so on, and the Marines. So you know what to do when there's a war. What do you do in the case of cyber war? Now, that has also been adopted into the armed forces, as you all know. In a web-based attack, you can have simple malware, where you plant malware that's collecting information, sending it back to you. You could get into a database and get information, and that happens all the time. They go for soft targets, like hospitals, and then you can do ransomware, that's a result of that. Let's see. Then Trojan horses. This is where they planted software on your systems, and they just stay dormant till somebody needs to awaken it and get some functions done. Let's see. And then you can hijack certain sessions to just steal information from them and so on. But here's some bad news. It takes only a few days to a few weeks to develop new attacks. But it takes about 200 days, and it went down to 150 days, to detect a breach, not to fix a breach, not to contain a breach. It takes about 150 days to detect a breach. Okay? So the odds are against us. Many breaches go undetected for years, and they can create a new mutation of a virus within a few hours. The major virus takes days or weeks, but a mutation can be created very simply, and that's still going to take us 150 days to detect. So you can see the odds are really stacked against us. And the other factor is the number of devices that people can tap into is increasing, and so on. And every single IoT device becomes an access point. Okay. And some other sad facts are that many companies have none to very little cybersecurity, and we are highly vulnerable. And the threats are increasing while the resources are decreasing, and that's the sad part. But what we need to also keep in mind is, so we need to recognize we can no longer do this on a transaction by transaction basis. We cannot do this physically. We have to get into a world of machine learning and cognitive computing. So it has to be something where the cognitive computing algorithms will actually detect any abnormalities and will actually go in and start fixing things by themselves. So the future of this world is in the cognitive computing world. And whether I can go on, I got tons of stuff, but I know your stomachs are rumbling, so I want to thank you for being a great audience, and thank you.
So now we open it up for questions. And our courses need to last 1 hour in order to be scanned. And so we have about 5 or 7 minutes. So we need some questions if you want to have this count for continuing education. That's one of the requirements by CompTIA. So I will start it off. And this is a softball here. What is a question that you're normally asked in one of these sessions? And that will start it off. And you guys be thinking of the next question.
No, I think actually people ask a lot about these advanced persistent threats. But this is not a setup. We didn't plan it, but since she asked it, it was a perfect thing. So what's an advanced persistent threat? So this is interesting. So normally what happens is people will come and repeatedly try to attack a certain system. And you can do that in many ways. There's a term called war scoping tool, where you can travel around and collect access points. And then you can actually, at some stage, let's say you entered a system, you don't just hack and take things out of the system at that stage. That was the simpler way of doing things. I got in here, I'm going to get some data or whatever I need, I'm out of there. But what it does is, it calls back to the home system and says, by the way, I'm in. Okay? I'm in this particular system, so I'm available to do whatever your bidding is. Okay? And then what it does is, now it kind of checks out all the security settings, turns some things off so it can become much more robust and have better access there. And then it goes into hiding. It doesn't do anything dramatic, doesn't attract any attention. From the Star Wars, it just cloaks its presence in that sense. And then after that, it will start looking around. So what else do these people have? How many other servers is this connected to? Do they have any banking-related data? They do have customer data. What other things do they have? So it collects a lot of information, and then it'll spend time trying to get access and privileges into those systems. So this is not a simple get in and get out kind of thing. So it's a whole strategy. And then other things it'll do is it'll try to multiply itself. It can clone itself. So it'll try to get multiple agents deployed in different areas that it can talk to. And these two are connected. So there are different staging areas that it has that can be coordinated. And then once it collects all the data, it wipes its footprint. So the idea is, once you're in there, remove all evidence. So don't leave anything behind. And then after it does all that, it just inactivates itself and waits. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't send information. It waits. And this is the challenge. So you can go for months and not know anything that is happening. If you know somebody's in your house and moving around, you can do something with it. But if they're hiding in a closet, but they know where everything else is, you have no way of detecting them. So that's one of the challenges. It's hard to detect in this case. But some of the things are actually, there's a big threat in the world of our electric grid. They do have a number of such agents, already deployed. They found some of these agents, so they don't know exactly what all the things that can be done are, but they know some of the things. So if somebody wanted to hurt us, all they have to do is go and activate one of the systems, and they can kill a lot of the grid. And as you know, our grid system is so delicate. If one goes down, it can trigger a number of things around the country going down too. So you already seen that in action. So advanced persistent threats are one of the big factors, but it takes a lot of resources. This is not an inexpensive proposition. So not necessarily, but typically they're either done by very large criminal corporations or by some rogue countries. Okay.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. What about our banks? How safe are our banks? I know the electric grid is important, but if tomorrow somebody went into my bank and took all my money out, that would cause a deep concern to me.
But that's a great question. And all I'm going to share is my opinion. This is not based on studies, but different banks have. Not all banks are the same. Some banks have better security than others, because security does cost a lot of money. It costs a lot of resources. First thing is, people don't come cheap. You don't get, if you're paying $40,000 for a security engineer, you have no security, right? Good security engineers are expensive, in the several $100,000. Just to give you an idea, the person that tapped into the that hacked into the airplane and controlled it, they went into the entertainment system and actually made the airplane bank. Do you remember that a couple of years ago? That gentleman is paid about I think like $20 million. The airline company hired him to fix all the stuff, so they don't come cheap. Okay, so it costs a lot of money. So a smaller bank typically does not have the resources. So if you go to a very rural bank, the other issue is trust, right? In fact, that's what the whole thing with insider threat was. They trusted people that you see every day, right? And if you go to a rural bank, there's a lot of trust involved. So that's other factors. So we don't want to kind of say it's bad, but it's definitely susceptible. And again, the other thing we said in the beginning is there's no such thing as 100% security. So just this is what I do. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't. I don't do banking from the phone, period. I never do that. I'll go from my laptop, but not from my smartphone, because the smartphone is more vulnerable in general. And also keep in mind, some people assume that the iPhone is very safe, right? And from the North Korean hacks and the Siemens, the Sony hack and so on, we know that's not the case. But the two things, Apple is very good with PR as compared to most of the other companies. And two is, it has only a small market share. So if you want notoriety, you don't go for the 15%, you go for the 85%. So they rather attack the Android. So what I do is, because there's a risk involved, I don't want to take that risk. I do it. So we all have to do whatever, all of us are comfortable with different levels of risk, and that's what we have to accept. So again, banks are not bad, we just need to be wise.
Many of the devices that you've described and many of the scenarios that we see have to do with devices that are used by civilians and manufactured often by civilian companies. So what do you see as the role of DoD in securing the Internet of Things, given that they are not the manufacturers or necessarily even the users of most of these devices?
Okay. Another good point. Going back to a lot of the device manufacturers, a lot of the sensor manufacturers are small companies, the innovators. Some of them are operating in the garages, they go on Shark Tank, and so they're very innovative people. But in the process, they either don't know enough about security, or so they're so passionate about one side, they don't necessarily have the cybersecurity awareness to do it or the resources to do it. It's very common. So one thing we realize is on the platforms they choose. So in your corporation, if you have an organization using a robust platform that takes that into account, is one issue. But that's a risk we're going to live with, and that's why they made some predictions that over 25% will be initiated from these kind of devices. These devices, many of these devices are not secure. So if you're the one that has to implement the devices, that's a good question to always ask. What kind of cybersecurity measures do they have? And again, you have to keep things real. If you're one person innovating, you're just happy to make new things, and that's where the heart is. And you also have to keep in, like, psychologically or physically, it's your left side that's the cautious side. Your right side is doing all the innovating. right? So if the two are battling, you will not be innovating. So what you do is you shut down the left side in order to do the innovating. That's just the way things are. So innovators normally, they have very little value for the cautious folks. And that's common in society too, you can see that. But good point. So device manufacturers, we have to watch them a lot more.